Dean,
Hello,
how's it?
Konrad, how you doing?
Very well, thank you. You?
Yeah, very, very good, thank you. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 11.
11.
We are strong into our double digits and coming off last week's number 10. It is really wonderful to welcome you back to another episode on the As Above, So Below podcast with my wonderful partner, Konrad van Staden. How you doing today?
Very well, man.
Okay.
Yeah, very excited. Talking about an interesting topic today.
Very interesting, yeah.
And I think we've covered some interesting things and diving into possibly one of the most interesting topics for me. God, nature, and man.
Yeah.
That triangular relationship. Yeah.
Perfect timing, I think, at the moment. The weather really going sideways here in PE at the moment and getting colder and colder as we speak, wind blowing properly. You've got an incredible view of the ocean here, and so you can see those clouds starting to roll in, and so I think it's going to be a lovely, a really cold weekend. What is it about nature that's always fascinated you? Have you got some memories that you kind of look back on fondly in terms of your experience in nature?
Yeah, I think for me, nature and I have quite an interesting checkered history, in the sense that I grew up here in the city. I've always lived pretty much in the cities and big cities all over, and travelled overseas to places where it's also metropolitan areas, and it's only later on in my life that I've really become conscious of nature. And it's funny because you have all these nature experiences growing up in South Africa, the Eastern Cape. You have all these wonderful experiences, but you don't consciously get to grips with it until something seems to happen to you somewhere along the line, and you suddenly become aware of it. And it's all those old experiences that you had that were delightful experiences, and you're present to the experiences, but suddenly they seem to make sense in a very different way. They have a different view of experience attached to it. So that's the history, and since then I really, it's delightful to live here close to nature, deep forests, nature walks, sea, in the sea, the air, the clean air, the sun, cold weather that comes through, the blistering wind. It's been amazing for me, and I think it's I'm very interested to have this discussion with you, because that's my experience, coming from that kind of thing. But you've had some pretty amazing experiences in nature and some of the extremes of nature, huh?
Yeah. When we were prepping for this conversation, it's a little bit mind blowing for me to think back on some of these moments that, in hindsight, were I think similar to what you're saying there. They were genuinely transcendent moments. They to experience them on that level, I hope I don't say something too bold now, right off the cuff. But I don't think it's possible to have a healthy spiritual life without that connection to nature. I just don't think it's possible. We live in a world where more and more of the things that we strive for and build for actually just disconnect us from nature. Constantly wearing shoes or long pants, or when it's cold outside, the first thing we do is we put on a jacket and a beanie and a scarf to not feel the elements, because we want to ensure that we're covered or warm enough to go outside. But when I look at kids, and when I look at my kids in particular, when it's raining outside, the first thing they do is the shoes come off and they're running in the puddles to feel the elements on their feet, to feel the water on their skin. Because I think they instinctively know that's what it means to be connected to themselves and to nature. And so I try and look back when I think about myself and when I think about my kids, these moments that I've had, the Northern Lights in Iceland are way up there.
Amazing.
Yeah, no, it's one of the most incredible things I've ever experienced. On old fishing ships out in the Arctic, experiencing ice caves and glaciers, and I have a fond liking towards ice and mountains and, the northern hemisphere kind of Arctic circles. But it's there in those places when I'm connected to nature like that, when I feel that I'm connected to myself, that I feel God's presence in those moments of transcendence. And it's been an interesting thing for me. It's been a challenge for me, I'll be very honest. And it's been interesting to have one or two conversations with people that, similar to as you were talking there, I say, have you had these kinds of moments, spiritual moments, if you will, out in nature? And I haven't found a person that's gone, no, I've never. Just about every single person that I've spoken to has gone, yeah, I've had one of those moments, spiritual, transcendent moments in nature, connected to myself, connected to God. I've had those moments. And then what's interesting, I've asked people, have you had those kinds of moments inside a church building? And people go, not as much.
Bad architecture.
Not exactly. Bad architecture. No, just haven't had similar experiences. Now, can you in a church building? Yes, of course. I'm not taking away from that. Absolutely. But it's an interesting observation for me to notice how people, humans, come alive in nature. And that is a wonderful part of, and why I'm really excited to have this conversation, to see about what it means. And I think I want to say again, I don't think it's possible to have a healthy spirituality in the 21st century without a conscious decision to be connected and in nature on a regular basis.
Can I just come in there? Because now you said something that's just away from the trend of the conversation. It's an important question that you asked there. Can people have the same experience inside a church building? Okay, we're not talking about somebody that's having an experience because of the sweeping up nature of the music or anything.
Yeah.
We're talking about, can somebody walk into a church building and have a transcendent experience? Now, it's interesting. I joked with you and I said, yeah, the architecture, but it's actually true.
Yeah.
What do you do when you walk into a vaulted cathedral that is filled with symbolism that tickles the unconscious, that rises up in you a sense of soul and draws your spirit upwards to the ceiling and the beautiful frescoes and the architecture, and this massive building that is in the middle of a city like Notre Dame? You walk into it and there is this resonance of something inside of you. There is something in that building that connects to a deep sense of nature, of who you are as a human being and as a spiritual, soulful human being. And that's the beauty of these old churches, right? They did that. And I like to think, I think of going to a forest or being immersed in a wave and seawater, or sitting in a cove of sand dunes. And that is my cathedral. Nature becomes my cathedral. It's like that for me. I haven't been to a single church in South Africa, other than possibly the Anglican one in Grahamstown. That's given me that kind of feeling. But in Europe, yes. But here in South Africa, nature becomes our cathedral.
Well, we've got to ask our question then. What is the point of the building? When we talk about these cathedrals or these places that, having gone around Europe, having gone around, whether in the UK at St. Paul's or even in Italy and in France, you walk into these churches, you walk into these buildings, you can't help be catapulted to a different place. It just, your soul moves. You just go, okay, There's something much bigger going on here. And
So,
yeah.
so I've forgotten the question that before I went off on a tangent. What were we saying? What was the? Can you remember the question you asked?
Is it possible to have a healthy spirituality without being connected to nature on a regular basis?
Because I'm just because what you're talking about now and the idea of the building is exactly it. It is the surroundings that resonate with something inside of ourselves. So I wonder if we're saying something then in that statement that it's about a community, it's about the collective, it's the collective connection between ourselves and each other, but not as human beings, but as beings in nature. We are all connected in and through nature to each other, to the animals, to the plants, everything. The wonderful idea I always think about is that there are atoms on the other side of the universe that is the same as the stuff that is inside of me. That is amazing.
Unbelievable, eh? Yeah.
I'm connected to everything.
Yeah.
So
and it's hard to wrap your mind around that. Like it really is, again, I mean, I'm going back to, raising our kids. I try and get them outside to look at the stars as much as possible. Because again, sun sets a little bit sooner. Load shedding helps because then it's really dark in the neighborhood and you can go outside and you can stare up and you can see some beautiful, beautiful stars. And that thing that you speak about, we have created a posture, unfortunately, in our lives, at the way we live our lives, the way we sit in front of computers or the way we sit on our phones. We're just like this on a regular basis. So we're hunched over and this is how we're working. And then what happens is that's how we begin to walk in the world. So I started noticing that to look up is actually hard for me. My neck and my muscles operate in a different way where this is really much more comfortable because that's how I live these days. So I'm noticing more and more, look up.
So the very nature, excuse the pun, the very nature of the modern world gives us a short-sightedness to not be able to see nature.
Yeah.
And the expanded view around us.
Yeah, we just don't.
It's no wonder we still have people around that think the Earth is 2,500 or 6,000 years old.
Whatever it may be. No, absolutely. So we just don't. I think as a natural, we are naturally posturing. You're still laughing at that, eh? Yeah. We just have a natural posture to think this is all that there is. So I'm reminded, as you were talking about that, there's that famous scene in Good Will Hunting, one of my favorite movies.
Oh, yeah.
Where Robin Williams is having, Matt Damon thinks he's the bee's knees, he's the shit, And he takes a shot at Robin Williams, and unbeknownst to himself, he takes a shot at Robin Williams' wife in the scene. And then they've got that scene where they're sitting on the bench overlooking the lake. And he says, you're a kid, you think you know everything about love, you think you know everything about yada this and yada that. He said, but you can't tell me what the Sistine Chapel smells like. Can't tell me what it's like to stand in the middle of a fjord and look out to these valleys and valleys of snow-topped mountains. When you begin to think that this is the only thing and my little world revolves around being in this place, no. Put your phone down, look up, look around. Walks on the beach, see how far the ocean stretches. The funny thing about our eyes is there is no limit to how far our eyes can see. Do you know that? Like, think about it. It's ridiculous to say this out loud. But we can see stars that are millions of miles away.
And not existing anymore.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can get into the science of whether they're still there and if the light's still traveling and everything else that goes with that. But you can see the sun or the moon. So those objects, what we're actually just limited by is the amount of light that those objects are giving off. So we can see far, but what we end up doing is just, and we have these eyes that are able to stretch. Because one of the things my wife and I always used to say is when we used to stay in Joburg, the first thing, as soon as you come off the highway and you come out of the city, your eyes can begin to stretch. Because they don't just hit the buildings that are 50, 100 meters away. All of a sudden, there's just rows. And you make your way out into the Free State and it's just farm, hills and hills and hills. Or if you're going to Durban, the moment you come into past Harry Smith and you come into the Drakensberg, your eyes just stretch. And you're exposed to a bigger something that intuitively, instinctively, you're connected to this thing. And so when you, as a Joburger, the moment you get to Durban, the first thing you do is you kick your shoes off and you run onto the beach to feel that sand under your feet. And we just don't do that anymore. We just don't do that.
With a luminous costume.
100%. Right? We're like Faf du Plessis. We put on our South African Speedos and there we go.
Yes, man. But Dina, I think the one thing about when we look at how man is placed in nature, of course the biggest issue that we're sitting with is the destruction of nature. And as we're talking and thinking about this wonderful world around us that we're seeing, that we're engaged in, how do we see ourselves as part of nature? And as Ian McCallum says in his book Ecological Intelligence, he says that I'm adopting that. There is no such thing as human nature. There's only nature. Everything is nature. We're all connected. We're all the same. There's just humans that are in nature. But we're there, and what does that mean? Because we're supposed to be these custodians of nature. A lot of people say dominion over nature. We have all the control.
Power and control,
And how do we get off of that high horse? How do we change that? Because we're doing a bloody bad job of taking care of nature. And it seems to me that unless we see ourselves as being part of nature, not control over it or dominion over it, nothing's going to change. And what you and I are discussing here, people are paying hundreds of thousands of rands to come into nature, to come to these places of heritage, of where it all began, to have a nature experience in search of something, that deep, mythical experience. To connect to that and to feel whole within themselves.
As you were talking there, I was reminded of, I was in the Northern Cape, I was doing some work with SA Tourism, and we went to a rock that had paintings on it, and where tribes in the local area used to come to this rock to pray. Thousands of years ago, they used to come here, and this is where they used to pray. And the gentleman that was giving us the tour, local, just began to talk about how they used to sing here and how they used to pray here and what some of those communities did in that place. And he said, you can only go onto this rock if you take your shoes off. And this must have been 2015, 2016. I think I was probably the only white guy in the area. Took my shoes off, and still, as you were talking there, one of the most spiritual moments, it's one of those liminal spaces, those moments where you just go, hey man, there is something here, where you realize that you are part of that natural, you are part of that thing. You are in it and of it. And God is in that place. Like Paul writes in Colossians, all things in Christ. Christ holds together in all things, visible and invisible. And it is in that moment, I think, where you go, okay, I'm connected to this thing. I'm part of this thing. I'm of this thing.
It's like being inside one of those cathedrals, right?
Yeah.
We've got to have quite a shift. Not only, of course, to look at what we're doing on the earth, what we're doing to nature. But if there's going to be a true connection to your own spirituality, then the only way is, like you say, through nature. And that again brings us around that we can't connect to nature unless we connect to ourselves. We can go and be in nature, but it stirs something internally. And then we inquire, who are we? What are we? How am I part of all of this? What is my purpose around all of this? And so many times I'm reminded when I look at what's happening all around us, that people are moving in a direction where it is just absolute dominion and distraction over Earth. And if anybody notices the book that we've got on the little table, then in our patriarchal society, male-dominated society that is all about gaining, the cutting of Mother Earth is a distraction. We see it in violence against women. We see it again, violence against nature, animals. The distraction says something about this fear of letting go of its power, and ultimately this fear to look within ourselves. And what are we going to discover? And it's only through this internal process, and that's why for me psychology is so important. And part of that, ecotherapy, becomes so important because it's where we take somebody into nature and they are humbled that they are just part of nature and they are disempowered of their stance that they had, but empowered to see how much more is possible within them. That then leads to a true understanding of who they are and who they are within this world.
Yeah, it is who we are in this world. And it is coming to grips with, I like what you said there, an ecotherapy. It's an eco-theology that leans towards what it means to have a stewardship mentality of looking after. In the scriptures there were things around language like a jubilee year, or there were years that came along that the farmers gave the land time to rest because they knew they would work the lands for a few years, but there was some time that it would come where that ground needed to rest. That ground needed to recover. You've taken what you can. Let it rest, let it recover, let it breathe, let it find itself again.
Cyclical nature.
It's a cycle of nature that suggests, but unfortunately that's all we know how to do, is we just know how to pillage, and move on. Pillage, and move on. So there's not a stewardship nature of I'm in this thing with this thing. I'm going to take as much as I can and move on.
But now, I've got to interrupt you there. You mentioned something here. Eco-theology. Is that a real thing?
I think so.
Does it actually, is there something written on it?
Off the top of my head, I wouldn't be able to give you anything. Bill Plotkin is probably a guy who might have said something along those lines. Kent Dobson. These guys speak about natural mysticism and that kind of thing. I would have to do a little bit of research. Don't quote me.
Yeah, I've read Bill Plotkin's books and I don't recall him talking about that.
Okay.
So you might actually have something
touched on something.
You can start a new church.
Start a new church.
Yeah, that's it. There's a new theology.
Yeah.
There you go.
there is something about what it means to be a created being in this created universe, and what it means to be part of the trees. You know, on the one hand, you are the alpha male, and yeah, you're the strongest thing in the universe, and yeah, you can carry around a chainsaw and chop down a tree. But if you take 2 seconds and just go, these trees have been around longer than you have. Just take a moment. You know, we look at these, the national park in America, I'm going to get it wrong now, with these trees that are literally thousands of years old. Just for 1 second, just think about that. You know, we read in the Psalms, David writes, the heavens declare the glory of God. You know, the moment we begin to look around at the heavens, the stars, the clouds, sunsets and a sunrise, the waves, the sounds of birds, a lion, you just go, okay. I don't need to sit in a velvet pew in a church somewhere to acknowledge God as a creator of this place that we find ourselves in. There is a much bigger thing here. Now, I'm not saying don't go to church. Please don't hear what I'm not saying before we get emails. Konrad at asba.com. We are part of a thing, in a thing, of a thing. And I'm going to say what I said at the beginning. I don't think it's possible to have a healthy spirituality in the 21st century without being connected to nature in that way.
But how do we do that? And again, going to your new book that you're going to write on eco-theology, there's so much that we learn about ourselves, about the world around us, but about ourselves and each other when we're in nature and when we look at nature. I'm reminded I've tried to grow pincushions here, and I love proteas. I love fanballs. But it's fascinating that the fires have to come along and wipe out. Then the seeds germinate. Then things start to happen.
Yeah.
It has to be destroyed in order to raise again.
Right.
So new life is formed when the old vines are burnt off. Sorry, I've got to go into a bit of theology.
Yeah.
The old has to be burnt. You know, there's just that image, that metaphor. It's everywhere around us. I mean, there's thousands of things that if I start talking about it now, I might start preaching, and I might betray how little I do know about plants. But
Yeah.
yeah.
And we unfortunately work very hard to prevent it from happening.
Yeah.
Brick and mortar to ensure that it doesn't happen. Prevent. But like you're saying, there is a natural flow to these things. There's the wind and the waves know something we don't. The beach, I've always found it so fascinating. Sardinia Bay is one of my favorite places in the whole world. And you'll notice that every once in a while, the guys will put up signs and boards and don't do this and do that, and please do this and please don't do that, and signs up here and walk this way, don't walk this way. Those signs last like 3 days. And the wind and the sand out at Sardinia Bay just doesn't stand a chance out there. That beach has evolved and changed in the last 10 years since I've been here. That other parking lot is gone, the bars that were on the other side, the fishing clubhouse and the life-saving clubhouse is gone. That beach has changed so much in the last 10 years just from natural processes taking place.
Isn't that wonderful? You know, that this idea that we are but a blip on the screen, and what was here stays. And these wonderful winds and rain and sun and plants that keep growing and animals, everything endures, everything keeps going. And what's so wonderful for me about it is that when we feel this, when we experience it, to go back to it, we experience something within ourselves that wants to rise up.
Yeah.
And how much of, we're very privileged here. But as you were talking, bricks and mortar separating, cages separating, circus animals. The idea that we've got to block off animals within large areas, and seemingly now they should be happy. But we're not allowing animals to roam freely. And it's very much what we do within ourselves these days. We block off our instincts. We block off our natural energies and flow. We don't allow that to come out. Why? Because we are scared sometimes about the impact it's going to have on other people, or theirs will have on ours. We're scared to follow these instinctual energies and let them find their own flow, their own path.
Yeah. Yeah, I think lots of things we could touch on there. As you're saying, we're talking about these experiences that we had as young people or as children in nature, being part of nature, with nature. But then we begin to grow up, and society begins to nudge us and push us and stay in your lane, don't do X, Y, and Z, don't do that, you have to do this, sit up straight. Until at some point you go, so there's something knocking on the door. There's something else here. Now for each of us, people who are listening, or even for us personally, there may be one or two little moments here or there that you could think back at that stopped you from doing certain things or started you doing certain things. But I would want to encourage everybody who's listening to maybe think back on one or two of those moments in childhood or in early years about what it meant to be connected to nature in that way. And maybe just take your shoes off and go for a walk. And I wonder if we could hear God's words to Moses. Take your shoes off. Where you're standing is holy ground. Feel the sand under your feet. Just feel something. Just feel the rain on your skin. Got a bunch of people who try and run from one building to the next because they don't want to get wet. Come on.
Allow Mother Earth to speak to you.
Just allow the rain on your skin.
Yeah.
Get a cold.
Listen.
Don't get a cold.
Feel what it's like to be human.
Just feel it.
And
I wonder, I'm just thinking out loud, I'm a culprit here as well. I wonder if this is why cold exposure is such a thing these days. Wonder if ice baths is such a big deal these days because we're craving to feel something.
And yet it's done through such an intellectual way, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's we do it with this purpose in mind and without feeling it.
Yeah.
Something's been done to us instead of engaging in it.
Yeah. Wonder. Feel like this needs a part 2, eh?
Well, yeah, I think an eco-theology, an ecotherapy, and what that looks like.
Stay tuned. Let's see. I think Konrad and I have a few ideas, and we'd love to stay connected with everybody who's watching and listening online. We have a couple of ideas with some nature retreats we'd like to do.
Soul and spirit nature retreats where we get to explore and discuss and play in nature.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, please hit us up on social media. We'd love to begin to put one or two of those little things together. We'll start off probably here in the Eastern Cape. See if we can find one or two spots to do 1 or 2 day, maybe an overnight somewhere. But we'd really like to begin to kick off 1 or 2 of these little communities as we continue to have these types of conversations. So the As Above, So Below podcast episode 11. I think we'll 11 part 2 next week. What do you think?
11 part 2, 11.5. Yeah, absolutely.
11.5. Thank you so much, everybody. My name is Dean Konrad,
I'm Konrad van Staden.
and I hope you have a wonderful week.
See you soon.